Joining us this morning, great friend of the show, a guy who I think was still watching the convention like 5-6 hours ago, maybe, the editor of quorumreport.com. It's Scott Braddock. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Well, I'm here. I'm caffeinating myself, getting awake again.
Yes, it was. I have to say, I commend you and the team for watching the entire Republican convention. That was quite something.
For what it was, you were up early. I saw you tweeting at 3:00.
Yeah, but I wasn't watching.
Oh. Well, God bless you. I have to tell you, the whole story of the convention is just fascinating. Someday I'll write a book about the complete backstory of this thing, just the way things went wrong from the technical side, the way there was a war in court over trying to have it in person and then having it online anyway. I can start there if you like. I mean, as late as Friday, Chad, the party was still, and at this point, it seems inexplicably, the party was still suing in federal court to try to have an in-person convention as soon as Saturday. Last Thursday, the technical side of things melted down. Now, keep in mind, the Democratic Party in Texas had their convention online seemingly without a glitch just weeks ago, and then for the Republican Party convention, it seemed like nothing worked when it was supposed to work. They had live streaming video issues. They had issues with the voting system. People were not getting their logins to be able to get into the voting system to be able to vote in a secure way for the chairman and for the party platform and things like that. And so on Friday, the State Republican Executive Committee, overnight, Thursday into Friday, had decided to hold off and not have another meltdown because Thursday was just a meltdown. Nothing worked.
Yeah.
People sat there for 8 hours basically staring at a holding screen while some cowboy holding music played until James Dickey, the chairman, came back onto the live stream at about 5:45 that evening and said, we're going to regroup and try again tomorrow. Then there was a meeting of the SREC at about 8 o'clock that night in which Dickey said it would probably be a bad idea to set people's expectations that we're going to start at a certain time. And so by Friday, they had decided to wait until Saturday to start their business. In the meantime, the chairman joined this lawsuit to try to have the party convention in person. When you and I talked last Monday, 1 week ago, it appeared that all of the legal options for trying to have an in-person convention in the middle of this pandemic, it looked like all of that had run out, Chad, but then the party joined this lawsuit to try to have it in person. So you move ahead to Saturday. Moving past all that, the chairman, even though the party won that lawsuit to have the convention in person in Houston, despite the order of Mayor Turner there in Houston, the chairman said, no, we're having it online anyway. So they go ahead with having it online. And, the people who were delegates, about 5,000 of them, were waiting to get their login to be able to, go into the voting system and be able to make their choices on various things. And throughout the weekend, there were just complaints of technical glitches, the voting system not working. The voting system completely crashed last night as they were making a few key decisions, Chad, in the party's convention. And at some point, you thought they might just call the whole thing off and try to, rearrange and move forward with a different convention. You couldn't make this up. Last night, they were voting, the party was voting and did vote to not go ahead and vote on a party platform during this convention, but have a second convention at some point in the future when some of this technical stuff can be worked out and work on the platform then, and just vote on party chairman, which they did go ahead and do. They voted for the chairman and the vice chair and the SREC members around 3 o'clock last night is when they were voting, and about the time that we learned that the incumbent chairman is probably being punished for all these technical difficulties. I think it was it wasn't a lock that Colonel West was going to win this thing, Chad, but I think after all of the problems, and I'm just sort of touching on the tip of the iceberg with everything I just told you as far as how many issues there were, Chairman Dickey had staked his candidacy on the mechanics of running the party, and being somebody who's good at running the party, and just objectively, I think he has been a pretty good person running the party. As far as running the day-to-day operations, creating and bolstering field operations around the state, fundraising, and all of that, he's been pretty good. But what was right in front of delegates, as he's making the argument that I know how to run the party, basically, they were seeing this convention meltdown, and so the evidence of him being able to run the party was not in front of their eyes as they were voting. And so Colonel West made his way in there.
That's not okay. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Scott. It wasn't like it's unfair to lay all this at James Dickey and say, "Hey, this is your fault." I mean, he's not the one who got to decide in-person convention versus online.
Well, the State Republican Executive Committee made that decision to push forward with an in-person convention. I think the criticism that's probably fair, though, is that in this time of a pandemic, as we always keep saying, every commercial and everything, Chad, starts with "in these unprecedented times."
Yes.
In this unprecedented time, it was probably incumbent on the chairman to make sure they had everything in place for a backup plan to be able to hold this thing online. I heard from some Republican activists who said that Dickey and his leadership team should have sort of seen the writing on the wall as their legal challenges kept, coming up short in trying to have an in-person convention, as the city of Houston didn't want them to do that. And there were a lot of Republicans who, frankly, did not want to have an in-person convention. It was only and it's fair to say there was only one segment of the GOP that was really committed to having an in-person event during a global pandemic where there are all these health concerns. But that was where the energy was at the State Republican Executive Committee. They kept saying and kept arguing that they wanted to have an in-person convention when the reality seemed to be that it was going to end up online anyway. And so the criticism I heard from some, fair or not, but the criticism was the leadership, including the chairman, should have had the backup plans in place, rock solid and tested and ready to go to be able to do this online in a way that went a lot more smoothly than what we saw over the last few days.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I think what's also probably fair is the Republicans just, quite honestly, they just waited too damn long to hold a vote and decide. I mean, the writing. You talk about the writing being on the wall. The writing was on the wall for me a while back, but even before the uptick, that it wasn't going to work. And if you want something that, where you can say, okay, we can create a plan and just stick with it, they should have decided weeks, if not months ago, to a virtual convention.
Yeah, the spiking numbers of COVID-19 cases, it's had the governor himself roll back some of his plans, right, for reopening the state, and having contingencies in place would have just been a smarter way to go. And it seemed, Chad, that they were trying to figure out how to do this online convention on the fly in real time as it was unfolding.
Yeah.
And that's why Thursday was certainly a big disaster with not even they couldn't even get people registered and into the system. They couldn't even get delegates situated such that they could watch a convention and participate in the convention online. Again, when the Democrats did it, pretty much without any problems, any big problems. Of course, a Republican convention and a Democratic convention are very different structurally, and let me explain that for just a second. The Democrats, they basically have a big kumbaya party where they get together and talk about how great the Democrats are and how bad the Republicans are. And they kind of all hold hands and, talk about, what they're going to do as far as trying to win some elections. And they had a big telethon. That translated very well to online, a YouTube stream. Republican delegates, and you've been to the Republican Party convention, Chad, Republicans like to do political combat with each other. They like to fight with each other, whether it's on the platform committee, rules committee, on the floor of the Republican Party convention itself, over what the rules are. I mean, one of the things that they were debating, and we'll see if this ends up being in their rules, since that's being kicked to this supposed second convention, one of the things is whether or not, office holders or candidates who are censured by the party ought to be excluded from the Republican Party ballot, which to some people sounds pretty extreme, although under the new leadership, under Alan West, I could imagine it might be something that could actually pass.
Huh. Okay, let's get to some other news. We could talk about Allen West, but we have plenty of time to do that in the future. Tell us about this. The governor maybe separating himself a little bit from President Trump. This, I think, tying in with a New York Times story that came out over the weekend.
Fascinating. Dave Carney, who is the political consultant, the chief political consultant for Governor Abbott, had just a quote that raised everybody's eyebrows back here in Austin. He said that, when it comes to the pandemic, the president has, quote, gotten bored with the pandemic, and so the governor has to run all of his requests by VP Pence, and that had been the case for a while now. Chad, when someone like Dave Carney, who most people don't even know who Dave Carney is, but he's you sort of think of him as like he's the political brain for the governor. He runs all of his campaigns, he makes the decisions about campaigns, and advises him closely.
He's a Karl Rove you don't see on TV.
That's true, exactly. And when someone and he's very low profile.
Yeah.
You don't see Dave Carney quoted a whole lot, in news stories, particularly in the liberal New York Times. And so when he is, that should tell you something. That's sort of like a trial balloon for what the governor really makes of the situation. I mean, that's the way I read that. And you've got the governor in a very difficult situation with cases going up of COVID-19 in the state, particularly in the urban centers in Houston, which we were just talking about. It's why they couldn't have that in-person convention for the Republican Party of Texas. That's where it was supposed to be in Houston, but in other places too, like Dallas and in San Antonio, and particularly down in the Valley. You probably have seen the announcements from the governor over the last few days, surging more resources down to the Valley, where things are getting particularly bad when it comes to this disease. People, getting COVID-19, people dying of COVID-19. And if you watch that Chris Wallace interview with the president over the weekend, wasn't the most flattering thing for the president. And about 40 minutes of Chris Wallace taking him to task on his statements about various things, and particularly about COVID-19. I think the governor stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's got to deal with those voters out there who are in the president's camp, people who support the president no matter what, and then a growing number of probably Republicans who probably think that both the president and the state government could be doing a lot more, and could certainly be doing things differently when it comes to COVID-19 and the response. And there's no, as we've talked about many times, there's no exact blueprint or roadmap for how to deal with a pandemic, although they have figured this out in other countries, Chad. And the way that the governor did a 180 on masks, the way that he's now decided to shut down bars again and put some more restrictions in place for businesses, that's losing him some support among some Republicans, and of course Democrats are not happy with him at all and haven't been throughout the entire thing.
Let me ask you something, and not a crystal ball question necessarily, but you've been a long time political watcher of Texas politics and governors who have run for president or entertained the idea of running for president. Let's just say you were going to run for president in 2024. Would you be okay with your chief political advisor kind of separating yourself from the would that be a campaign move, Mr. Scott Braddock, to put daylight between you and the president when he is polling so low on his response to the pandemic?
Well, it's an excellent question. Very good, Chad. I think that it would be fair to say that the president is starting to lose the support of a lot of Republicans who want to find creative ways to try to put distance between themselves and the president, who still does enjoy the support of the base of the Republican Party for sure, even though those numbers are probably eroding a little bit at this point. But he's been pretty rock solid with the base, and if you're somebody who's considering higher office moving forward, which any governor of Texas is never going to take it off the table. It's often thought of as a stepping stone to the White House. Anybody who's governor now, they think if George Bush could do it, well, I could do it.
Yeah.
I think it's wise at this point for somebody who's going to be on the ballot at all, whether they're running for president or for re-election. I think a lot of Republicans are starting to think about and consider what the world is going to look like after the Trump presidency, whether that's after this year or, coming up in another 4 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Scott, plus, hey, having $38 million in your war chest, you can do a lot of things with that.
That's just absolutely absolutely true.
A lot of things you can do.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Seed money.
Yes, Scott, tell folks where they can find more about what you're focusing on and what you guys are going to be writing up.
QuorumReport.com. You can get a subscription there. Just click on subscriptions at QuorumReport.com. We're going through the fallout in the Republican Party, what that means for the elections coming up in November, and we've also got all the details about school reopenings. It's sort of a moving target, Chad. I know you've been talking about it here. All the details from what Texas Education Agency is going to be allowing the school districts to do as they try to move up and move to open their doors during this pandemic. It's all there at QuorumReport.com.
Very good. Scott, we'll let you get some sleep, and we'll talk to you later on.
Yes, sir. Talk soon.
That's Scott Braddock, editor, QuorumReport.com.